Hello, everybody. Welcome to our September Business Applications NYC event. As always, we're joined together by members of both the NYC Business Applications User Group and the NYC Power Platform User Group. I'd like to thank Nick Doelman for agreeing to deliver a session today on security within Powerapps portals, and also thank the organizing committee, Mihir Shah, Aaron Fishman, Arun Vinuth, and myself, Eric Levine, as well as congratulate Arun on receiving his MVP award in business applications. During the presentation, if you don't mind, keep yourself muted, and you can ask questions either in the chat window or raise your hand, and we'll have probably time for questions at the end. So before we start, let's give a warm welcome to Nick. Nick is currently, until next week maybe, an independent trainer, consultant, speaker, podcaster, blogger, focused on the Power Platform and Dynamics 365. He has been awarded the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, the MVP award, since 2017, and is a Microsoft certified trainer since 2019. He's also a co-principal trainer and content creator on 365 Training, which provides online training courses for the Power Platform. He has been engaged as a subject matter expert in hundreds of Dynamic CRM or 365 and Power Platform projects, covering a wide range of industries and sectors, and a qualified competitive powerlifter who has competed at the 2018 and 2019 Canadian National Powerlifting Championship. Today, Nick will be discussing about security practices using Powerapps portals. Powerapps portals, for whoever is not aware, they provide an easy-to-use interface that allows us to interact with Dataverse information on externally facing websites, which also provides challenges to ensure that the data that is surfaced on portal pages is secure and only available to those who are allowed to see it. Today's session provides a high-level overview of the security model in Powerapps portal and the steps that you can take to ensure that your database info is properly protected within Powerapps portals. You can learn how to use this model where your organization is in its digital transformation journey and take the next steps to move your organization to the next level. You can visit Nick's website at readyxrm.blog for a lot of great content. So Nick, welcome, and take it away, please.
All right, thanks, Eric. I appreciate the warm welcome and the intro, and pretty excited to be speaking to everybody there from wherever I guess you're logging in from. New York City was one of not the last place I visited before the pandemic hit, but was like the second last place. It was January 2020. Myself and David Yak delivered some training for some partners and stuff at the Microsoft offices right in Manhattan. And yeah, we had a bunch more training planned in the months later on, and then yeah, the world just went a little bit sideways, and here we are doing these things virtually. Anyways, I'm going to share my screen, and let's hope Teams is get some of the stuff out of the way, all these pop-ups. So I just want to make sure that you see my screen. It should say Powerapps Portal Security.
Yep.
Cool. Great. I'm just going to move you guys over to the side here. I'm going to get the chat window open. I'll try to keep corner of my eye on the chat window. But if you do have questions, yeah, put up your hand. If there's something we can address right as I'm speaking about it, that's great. If it's going to be a bigger conversation, we can move it to the end. We should have lots of time for a discussion. So let's just dive right into it. So a little bit about me. Eric did a great intro. So this is me today. I am, as of today, still, it's Thursday, Power Platform Dynamics 365 specialist, 5 times Microsoft MVP, a trainer. Here are my links to get a hold of me on Twitter, LinkedIn. I do participate in some creating content for 365.training. A little bit more about me. Eric did mention in his intro that I'm into powerlifting. So this is what I do when I'm not doing Power Apps and Power Platform stuff. I'm picking up heavy things, putting them down, going to the gym. It's, you know, some guys, when they hit their 40s, they'll start golfing or start running marathons. I decided to take up powerlifting. I wanted to lift weights. So that's what I've been doing. And it's a lot of fun. And I could talk probably all night about this, but that's not what you guys are here for. Big news, if you just saw my LinkedIn profile, I've actually, starting this Monday, I'll be joining Microsoft as a senior content developer. I'm going to be creating content for around the Power Platform for Microsoft Docs site. So for those of you who are using Microsoft Docs and sometimes might kind of grumble, you can't quite find what you're looking for, it's not clear. Tell my coworkers about it. They'll probably, because I'll be the new guy, I probably will be part of my job to fix some of that stuff up. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. So that's kind of the big reveal announcement. I finally let all my clients kind of, they're able to talk to all of them. So I'm going to be transitioning into that. But still, a lot of my content, I still hope to be doing presentations like this and blogs and being involved in the community, because I think that's just really important. We have a lot of information, a lot of sharing, and I learn a ton of stuff myself. So I want to continue to be a part of that. So let's actually talk about portals, Powerapps portals, or Power Portals, or you may have heard them called Dynamics 365 online portals, or even back where the original product was from a company called ADX Studio, which is a Canadian company originally from Saskatchewan. For those of you who also I didn't mention, I'm broadcasting to you today from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. So just a few hours, probably I think it's about an 8-hour drive north of probably New York, or just a 1 or 2 hour flight. Anyways, so let's talk about what Powerapps Portals allows us to do. And really at its core, it's just a content management system, a lightweight one, the same as like a WordPress or Wix or some of these things. But what it allows us to do is to create those externally web-facing applications, but tie back into your Dataverse. So you have your Power Apps, whether they're Canvas apps or model-driven apps, where your staff and your employees work and they work with those business applications. But Powerapps Portals allows us to take that information and kind of put it to the external world for external stakeholders, whether they're customers, members, even sometimes employees in certain situations. But this is really what Portals allows us to do. So now how that's done, as opposed to me just going through some decks, let me just quickly give you a bit of a demo here. I'm all about demos. I like to show things as opposed to just, you know, talk about things. I'm in my Maker portal, and I would just go to a different environment. I'm going to pop over to there. And there's a whole process to provision a Powerapps portal as part of your Dataverse environment or into through your Maker portal. I'm not going to go through that today. It's pretty easy, but you can basically you create a portal application. This shows up in your list of apps. So I have a model-driven app, I have a Canvas app, but I also have this portal app. And what I can do is I can go into something called the Portal Studio. The Portal Studio is your primary tool for creating Powerapps portals. Now, at the end of the day, all of this information is being stored in Dataverse as Dataverse data. It's portal metadata. So everything you're doing in the studio will actually be saved as data in the backend. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. First, I'm just going to go through a quick demo. I'm just going to remove some of these warning messages, and we're going to get into that as well. I'm just going to create a brand new page. So this is like the home page. When you provision a portal, it will create a set of default pages like your home page. And then you can begin to edit it. So here you see, as I'm mousing over, there's different things for text. I could add other columns and things. So let's just go and create a new page. And then through the page, we have a whole bunch of different templates as well. So we can create different templates, our own templates, or use ones that come out of the box. I like to use page of title. And if you've seen some of my other presentations before, I've kind of gone into this, and usually in those presentations I go in a lot more depth. This is more about security, so I'm going to focus on that. But I did want to at least give you a little bit of a ground level of where this is. So here on this page, I can begin to change my page title here and a few things. So what I want to do is I just want to maybe do a directory. I want to show a list of the accounts that are in my Dataverse or in my Dynamics 365, and I want to display that on a publicly facing web page. So what I'll do is I'll create this page. I'll just call this my accounts, and that's the name of the page. And then every time I update a property when I'm designing or building some portal assets, it will save it. So that's why you see those little, little brief things. So here I'm just going to go my accounts. That's my partial URL. So that's where I'll know to be able to navigate to if we wanted to navigate directly to this page. And then here I could begin to edit the content. So here I'm just going to remove some of this text. I don't really want it. And we have some other tools here. And this is something fairly new to portals. It's this tool, this Portal Studio has only been for about 1.5 years. And what it is, it's a way for you to kind of use a what you see is what you get, a much more citizen maker friendly way to design and build your portals. So I'm just going to add a 1-column section to my page, and then within that column section, I'm going to begin to add some other portal components. Now, what I could do is I could add things like text, I could add images, and these are the types of things that if you're doing WordPress or even some basic web design tools, these are the types of things that you would expect to see. What Powerapps Portal does, it gives you those, but it gives you some additional things. So of course we have like iframes, forms, and all that stuff, but I can begin to inject stuff like forms and lists, Power BI reports, chatbots. Today, I'm just going to add a list component. And what that is going to do, it's going to put that component on my web page. And then here, I'm going to need to fill in some properties. So I'm just going to, again, call this my accounts. And I'm going to select a table name. And this is now pulling into my Dataverse tables. So even the out-of-the-box tables that come, whether it's a vanilla database or whether you're using Dynamics 365, and even including your own custom tables that you might create for your own applications you'd be building on top of Dataverse. So here I'm just going to pick account, and that's like a system table. And then we see a listing of views here. Now these views are your model-driven app views. So what I like to do typically if I'm building a portal, what I'll do in my model-driven app designer is I'll create views that are going to be specifically used for the portal. If we, again, because we don't want to necessarily show all the different data to our customers, we might want to show certain things. For now, though, I'm just going to choose active accounts, and there we go. So we've added this into this page, and what's going to happen is I have the account name, main phone, address, city, primary contact. Now, what used to happen is when I created this is now exposing Dataverse data. So that made people pretty nervous because they're like, when I was giving presentations or doing training, people would kind of go, ooh, hold on a second, you're exposing Dataverse data to a public website. What about security? And I'd be like, yeah, don't worry, we'll get to that. And we would go, I would browse the website. And by browsing the website, just as a little side note, what this does, this clears the portal cache. There is caching within Powerapps portals, and that makes it run more efficiently. But sometimes when you're developing things, you kind of run into problems. Now, here's what happens. I'm going on this page and I see my accounts, and there's no records to display. So you might think, okay, hold on a second, there's no records to display. That might mean that there's no accounts in this particular Dataverse instance. Well, if I go back into my Powerapps here, just into my maker portal, and go into my one environment, and if I just load a classroom, a model-driven app, and I have my accounts and contacts here, well, I have a whole list of accounts. So what's happened? So this is something that Microsoft implemented fairly recently. By default, they're adding security features to your portal as you built this. If I built this exact same portal even like 2 months ago, what you would have seen on the Powerapps portal page is a whole list of data, but here we're not seeing anything. So automatically we need to start thinking about security right from the get-go. So not a problem. I'm going to go back into my portal designer here. I'm going to choose this particular component. This is called a list component. And we see here we have this permissions that, and it's telling me right away, by default, permissions are applied to components containing data. So this means that Microsoft is now, versus they used to take a reactive approach, now they're taking a proactive approach to Powerapps portal security. So we have this thing called table permissions. Table permissions is very similar to permissions that you would do in Dynamics 365 or Dataverse, but it is different. It is a whole different engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on Manage Table Permissions. I have one here already created for account. Let's just go into this one. So here's my table. Here's my account. I have content access. I'm going to actually just get rid of that. I am going to create a new permission. I'm just going to call this accounts for everyone. And I can call my table permission whatever I want. I'm going to pick the table. Again, I'm going to pick account. And the access type, I'm going to make this just global. Global meaning full access to everyone. And I'm going to add a read privilege. So I've added this. That's my table permission, but I need to go a step further. I need to assign this to a web role. And we're going to talk a little bit more about web roles in a few minutes, but I'm just going to assign it to the anonymous users web role, meaning anybody visiting my site, they're anonymous. By default, they're going to be kind of virtually assigned this anonymous user role. They're going to be able to read the data. So I've saved this. This is now creating this new table permission. Again, I'm using the Portal Studio, but this information is being saved directly in Dataverse tables, and we're able to manipulate it from there. And I'll show you that in a little bit. I've created this. I'm going to go back to my design studio here where I was actually here. I'm going to go back to this particular page. I'll just go to the home page. Once again, browse website. And the reason I'm again doing this is flushing the cache. So every time I'm bringing up this page, it's going to show me fresh information. And now when I'm doing this, if I go to the home page and I click on my accounts, now I'm seeing my list of Dataverse data. Now, the reason why I'm able to see this, a couple things, is because I set up the table permissions. But let's just take a step back here. From a app creation perspective, this probably took me 15 minutes, not even. Of course, I was talking and explaining a few other things, but think about that. From scratch, you can build a web-facing app that's showing Dataverse data, including, built-in authentication and searching, formatting to a certain extent. That's really the true power of Powerapps portals, is you're able to surface that Dataverse data. For those of you who've done traditional web development, whether it's in .NET or some other languages, can you think about how long it would take you to build a web application from scratch, and that's pulling in data from Dataverse and exposing it onto a web page like this? Believe me, it would take a lot longer than 10-15 minutes to get it even formatted to this kind of style, including trying to figure out the security access to it as well. So going into back into the presentation here, we talked about the Dataverse information, and like I said, when I give these demos and give these presentations, the first question that I generally get asked is, that's great, but how do we secure this data? How do we lock it down? And originally it'd be like, okay, as a portal developer, it's on you to set up that security. And there's a couple different things we can do. Now, all of those mechanisms are still there. However, like I mentioned, now there's a little bit more of a proactive approach to it. And we'll talk about some of these methods. So of course, the hacker, we're kind of scared. How do we protect our data? And of course, why this is sort of a hot topic in the last few weeks is there was an article from an organization called UpGuard. And again, the media and, the media at the end of the day, they like to have their headlines and they like to have their clicks because, all the advertising that goes up on the side. So there we have, the title is By Design, How Default Permissions on Microsoft Power Apps Expose Millions. You read something like that right away, you're like, your heart kind of starts pumping a little bit. It's up in your throat. You're like going, oh, shoot, like, is my data exposed to the whole world? So we're going to talk about what happened there specifically, and again, really not to worry about it, and what Microsoft has done going in the future, and what you can do if you're building portal apps, how to protect your data. So I really want to talk about how that Powerapps portal security works. So we really need to understand how it works before we can know how to configure it. And really the biggest thing as I'm training people and they're brand new to Powerapps portals, even though they have a ton of experience in Dynamics 365 or Dynamics CRM, is Powerapps Portals has its own security mechanism. It's not using that default Dataverse security. Now, that being said, it's very similar, but it is its own thing. So whereas in Dataverse or Dynamics 365, it's really based on users, business units, and security roles, here in Portals, it's based on contacts. So people that visit your portal, generally they're anonymous, so they don't belong. But if they do log in, if they do authenticate, they are going to have a contact record. And that's really what we're going to base the security on. Those contacts can be assigned to web roles, either one web role or multiple web roles, very similar to Dynamics 365. And those web roles will control access to two things, page permissions and table permissions. So let's talk first about page permissions. And again, I just wanted to highlight the fact that this information is being stored in Dataverse, and we're going to be able to take a look at all these configurations, including the security setups within Dataverse tables themselves. There is a model-driven app called the Portal Management app, and where you can view and set up a lot of this information, things that you can't necessarily do within the Portal Studio yet, but they are continually improving it. So again, like I said, contacts equal portal users. A Dataverse contact is a portal user. Now they can be authenticated using a local authentication, which is kind of built into Powerapps portals. That's not necessarily recommended. That's there kind of from a legacy aspect. That was part of the ADX Studio way of doing it. But then as they evolved, it's better to use an external authentication. So for example, Azure AD B2C. Now, this presentation isn't so much on authentication. That could be a presentation on its own, again, like many things. But just suffice the fact that we have a user, they're going to log in, and they're going to be able to see some data. So with these, then they're assigned web roles. And like I said, a user could have multiple web roles, very similar to Dataverse security roles. They're additive. And there are a couple default web roles, and you did see this earlier when I exposed those accounts. There's the anonymous user role, or otherwise known as the unauthenticated user. These are just the visitors to your portal. And then there's the authenticated users, and they're not necessarily linked to contacts, but they're sort of a catch-all for everything. So we have this concept called page permissions, and before I kind of go into the data structure behind it, let's actually see how this works. So I'm going to go back to my Powerapps portal, and let's say that we see this directory page and we're building this portal for a client, and they say, okay, we don't want this page available to the general public. We only want it available to our own customers, or to certain individuals, or to just again, we should be behind authentication. Fair enough. So the first thing we can do is to lock down this entire page. So within the Portal Studio, I'm going to go into this one. It's the same one. Here we go, my accounts. And we're on this page again. Now, there was two things. We set up earlier table permissions to view that data. So if I click on here, I see we have the table permissions. If I click elsewhere, I'm on the entire page, and I have the ability to create permissions. Now this is on the page level. So if you have content here that may not even necessarily be Dataverse content, like text or images, and you want to protect that, you can protect the entire page. So I have these pages available to everyone. I'm going to shut that off. And if I shut that off, and I don't select any roles here, actually I'm going to select roles that I only want this page available to authenticated users only. So by doing this, I've made this authenticated users. I'm now going to, once again, browse to the website. And you're going to notice a couple things that are going to happen now that we've protected this entire page. And we see that it is refreshing here. And immediately I'm getting redirected to a sign-in page. The other thing you'll notice too is on my homepage, I no longer have a hyperlink to that My Accounts page. That's completely disappeared. And that's because we've turned on those page permissions. Now, I could still turn on that link, but even if I tried to go to it, remember we knew the URL. It was, I believe it was My Accounts. And let's see how good my memory is. And I do that, and now it's still prompting me. It's prompting me to log in because remember, we set this page to be only available to authenticated users. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sign in with my Azure AD. And I could have signed in using Azure B2C as well. I have an account there, but just using this for now. So I'm authenticating. It's redirecting me to a profile page because it's going to want to confirm my email, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. And notice now that I've signed into the portal, I've now authenticated, I have this My Accounts page back. I click on this and a couple things here. Now, this is actually filtered down, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I now have access to this page again. But if I sign out, that page completely disappears, or I'm going to actually get my authentication, I log in again. So that's the first level. That's page permission. That's your first line of defense to protect your content in a Powerapps portal. So how does that all work? So basically on the back end, we have our contact record, and now that contact record can be linked to multiple web roles. In my case, we didn't need that because we use the authenticated users, which is that catch-all. And that web role is associated to what's called a web page access control role, which is linked to that web page. And we set all of that up very easily in the Portal Studio. If you recall, I went into the Portal Studio itself. I simply just went here, I turned this on, and I went to authenticated users. If you were working on portals even 6 months ago or years ago, this didn't exist. So what did you have to do? You would have to go into something called, I'm going to go into apps, the Portal Management app. The Portal Management is a model-driven app that gets provisioned when you provision a Powerapps portal. And this is what you can use to view the Dataverse metadata that's describing that portal. So I'm here, and it has things like, content snippets. It has web pages, there's web templates, different web links and everything like that. What I would have had to have done first is set up a web page access control rule. And we see here that we have that restrict read on the My Accounts. I have a few set up here from different demos, but we have this web page access control rule. It's linked to this web page. Again, the web page is data within Dataverse. And if I look at things like web roles, we see that it's only linked to authenticated users. And I could begin to add other web roles to this so different people could have access to this page. So when we were configuring portals in the past, we would have to go through and set all of this stuff up. Not too bad if you understand the data structure, but you can tell from a maker perspective, this could get confusing pretty fast. So this whole new Portal Studio, it makes it easier to configure, and also makes it also secure that we're protecting our page. So that's the first level. So then, the typical question would be, okay, that's great, we can protect the page, but how can we protect the data itself? Because maybe I don't want all of my customers to see all of the data. We want to limit that. So this is where we go into table permissions. So I'm going to just go back into my deck for a minute. And, we have talked about page permissions where we can set that up, and how the link disappears as well. But now I want to talk about table permissions and what table permissions do. And we gave you a bit of a preview earlier. They define the entity that would be secure. What I mean by entity, of course, I mean table, naming conventions. I'm still not getting quite used to it yet. Determines what is in scope. So what are we seeing? What are the relationships to the contact itself? What privileges? And of course, we have our, the permissions that we all know and love: read, write, create, delete, append, and append to. And anybody that's ever written like the PL 200 or the MB 200, you're always trying to figure out which is the append to, which way does it work. And so we have the same thing in Portal. So we still need to figure that out. Anyways, how this is done is, like I showed you before, is we set up specific table permissions, but we set that up on the data itself. So let's just again quickly review that. I'm going to go to my page here. I have to click on my list. We had our permissions or managing table permissions. And we created this one where we had accounts for everyone. I'm going to delete that particular table permission. And I'm going to take a look at another one that I created earlier called account. And this is where I've had the account, I've linked to the table, and I've given my access type contact access, meaning I only want to see the accounts of which I as a contact have access to, meaning my login. Remember, all portal logins are equal to contacts. I only want to, it's going to filter and it's going to protect that data. And we're going to sort of see here, I have this relationship and it's going to show you how these things begin to filter out. So if I was to, actually what I'll do is I'll recreate this permission. I'm going to delete it. And let's just kind of go through it. So I'm going to create a new permission. I'm going to give it a name. Just going to say, just view my own account. Accounts or account. It is a one-to-many, so it'll really only be one account. I'm picking the table. Again, I'm going to choose account. And this is where I'm going to pick the access type, or what we call the scope. Now, global was everybody has access to it, or whether based on the permissions, but it's for everyone. Then we have content access, contact access. Contact is that logged in user. Now you're going to need a relationship to that particular table based on the contact, whether it's one you create yourself or one that already exists. We could have account access, meaning we're only going to link to records that are linked to that particular contact's account. So think of something like a customer support portal where we have Dynamics 365 and we have support cases. Those support cases maybe are linked to an account record, but any contact that belongs to that account record, we're going to be able to view each other's support cases. So if I have colleagues putting in tickets and I log into a portal, I'll be able to see their tickets as well. And then we have self-access. Self-access is really strictly only for the contact table, and that's really just for your own profile and that type of information. For now, I'm just going to pick contact access. I'm going to pick the relationship name. This is going to show the schema name for the relationship. So of course, if we've been building tables in Dataverse, we're all used to how those relationship naming conventions go. So here I can say whether it's the primary contact or the customer accounts one, that's the one I'll probably use, or I could have used this MSA, which I believe is part of the partner linking there. So I'm just going to choose that. And then it's going to give me a bit of a diagram. And then I can start setting my privileges. Now, just to view the data, I can put read. But if I want to do something, if I want to update the data through a form, or I want to create, let's say I want to create new accounts or create new cases or that type of thing, I'll have that. And of course, delete and append to. And once I've done this, I want to add roles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a custom role. I have an instructor role here, meaning anybody who belongs to that instructor custom role will be able to view that data. So I've done this. Now, the other thing I can do from here is I'm going to save this. Within the Portal Studio itself, there is no place to create and manage roles. This is where we're going to need to go back into our Portal Management app. So I've created this particular view here. Let's actually see what happens. Oh, a couple things I need to do first. I'm going to go into the Portal Management Studio, which is managing the portal metadata. I'm going to go into the security section and I'm going to look at the web roles. Excuse me. We have these ones, the anonymous users, the authenticated users. Of course, we have an administrator's one that has special privileges, but let's look at the instructor. This is one that I created myself. I can call it whatever you want. And I don't want this to be a catch-all for authenticated users or anonymous users, so I've set that to no. And then the other thing I've done here is under related, I can have the particular table permissions or also the contacts. So let's take a look at the contacts. And we see here that I've associated myself and a few others linked to this particular web role. Very similar to what you would do in Dynamics 365 security roles, you would assign users to that. What I can do is if I delete or remove rather all of these contacts from this particular role, and I go back to the portal itself, let's take a look and see what's going on. I'm going to hit browse, which is again going to refresh the cache. It's going to clear everything out. It's also the name of a very famous podcast. And first off, I don't see my account, and that's because we still have the page permissions, which is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in, and I'm going to sign in again just using my Azure AD, and I'm going to authenticate automatically, get my profile. But here we see the My Accounts button. I'm going to click on this. And now I get a message that I don't have permission to view these records. So yes, I now have access to the page because I belonged to the authenticated users. Authenticated users have access to the page, but I no longer have access to any of those accounts because remember, we removed that table permission where we provided access to those accounts. So, and I also didn't add myself to the instructor. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to add myself once again to the instructor web role. So here's the instructor. I'm going to add existing contact. I'm going to, I think it was this one I've logged in with my, I'll actually pull them both in here. I have one with the ADB2C as well. I'm going to add these contacts to that view. Now, again, if I just go here, even if I do a regular refresh, oh, it did. Okay, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the caching. But we see now that I've logged in and I only see the account that I actually belong to, the A-Datum Corporation. If I went to look here, look at A-Datum, again, this is just a regular model-driven app I've created, and I look at the related contacts. And I see here that I belong to this, so that's why I have visibility to the A-Datum Corporation, because there is that pre-existing relationship there. So that's really, from a high level, how table permissions work and how we could begin to break them down. Now, the other thing about table permissions that I do just quickly want to highlight is, let's just go back here. Again, if I go to the portal management app, table permissions, all of this is being stored in Dataverse. I can take a look at that metadata directly in a regular model-driven app. So we see here, just view my own account. That was the one I created through the studio. Here's the account, access type contact, and then here's the relationship and the different privileges. There also is this concept of child table permissions. So what I can begin to do is build a hierarchy. So for example, maybe I only want to view cases that belong to my account or accounts I'm associated with. And what I can begin to do is begin to build a hierarchy and really fine tune how I'm going to protect my Dataverse data using that security structure. So in a nutshell, that's really the high level of how these permissions work in Powerapps portals. So I do want to, I'll quickly go back to my deck here and talk about, again, there is that relationship of the portal metadata. We have a contact linked to many web roles. The web roles are associated with the table permission, and the table permission is associated with the Dataverse table. That diagram is really a nutshell of how these permissions work. And again, we have the different permission types, the global, contact, the account, parental, and self. These are the different types of scoping. And just quickly break down the differences between the page permissions and the table permissions. Page permissions really is at that page level. You're enabling, restricting access to web pages. You have access to the page or you don't, kind of on or off. And you can set that up in the Portal Studio. Table permissions, it's more relates to the Dataverse data itself. The data access is granular. It's kind of based on, you know, the records that you've linked to as a contact and privileges. And you can, it's no longer public preview. I need to fix this slide, but you can manage it in the Portal Studio and the management there, or you can do it again in the Portal Management app, whichever you're comfortable with. So let's talk a little bit about something called OData, because OData was the hot topic within that particular article, because a lot of organizations used an OData feed within Powerapps portals for various purposes, and they made mistakes while they were setting this up. So what happens is if you are creating a Powerapps portal, and I'm in the portal management, so that's that back end, because I don't even need to create a web page for this. What happened is you can go into something called into a list. And here I've created one called just course info because I have some information on courses. And I've created that list the same as what we would have created from the front end. And here's the name, here's the table that it's linked to. Now, originally, as I mentioned earlier, this particular checkbox, the enable table permissions, that's something we set up in the studio earlier. This is on by default. And that only started about a month ago. Actually, if I shut this off, I am getting some weird errors here. I'm going to save this. I wonder if it's going to let me. Okay, it is. That's great. So basically, by default, it used to be this would be shut off. So far, so good. I go to the OData feed because I actually want to use my Powerapps portal to have an OData feed. Maybe we want to do this for an integration or something. So we've enabled this. I've given an OData name course and an OData entity set name. So here's where the teardrops start with this particular setup, because originally this particular setting, enable table permissions, was not turned on. Here's what happened if someone started sniffing around the portal. So I'm just going to this portal here. This is the one I've been working with. And what I can do is I can just go to the portal name and I can just do / and I can do _ OData. And that's there by default. And here's what happens. All of a sudden, I get a list of all the OData feeds that are part of my Powerapps portal. That's a bit nervous. Here's where it gets worse. I can take that courses, because that's the name of that collection, and I can just do it here. Now notice I did not set up a web page. I have no authentication set up, and I'm just doing /OData /courses, and boom. I now have access to Dataverse data, and we have not even created a web page for it. So this is where people started getting very nervous, because all of a sudden they had access to that OData data. Now, the problem was because anybody setting up a Powerapps portal should, if they're following best practices when they're creating that OData feed, should have turned on enable table permissions. Most people did not. And this caused a problem. So what happens now is if I create a brand new list, this is going to be turned on by default. So I've turned this on, the enable table permissions, and by enabling table permissions, if I now go back here, I might have to refresh the cache. I actually do. So I'm just going to quickly do a browse website. And again, I'm just going to go here and do a / OData. Still showing me I have courses here, so I'm like going, aha, I'm gonna steal all their data because I know they didn't protect it. And if I do this, I am still getting this, so this is not good. So something is funky on my back end. Oh, unless I think I know what it is. I'm still authenticated, so I'm going to. So it is working. Let me just go back here, and once again, I'm going to browse to the website. And I'm actually going to sign out. Okay, now that I've signed out, so again, now I'm a hacker. I'm still seeing courses. And I should be able to go into this now. Yes, there we go. So now, because I no longer have access with because I have table permissions turned on, I actually see that I'm getting denied access to that data. So by default, going forward, Microsoft has protected anybody accessing that OData, but that was the main issue that was in that article, was these organizations were using that OData feed, and that was exposed because you need to actually originally turn that on. Now, in the projects that I've worked on, I've never really needed to use the OData feed for much. If I am going to do that kind of data feed, I would actually usually create a liquid template and create something like a JSON feed or something like that. So for now, I'm just going to basically, that's just basically the main issue. So let's just sort of kind of wrap up on my presentation. So we see something like this. The first thing I'm going to say is good news, don't panic. I guess when people panic, they buy toilet paper. I'm not sure why. That's really what happens. It's like, uh-oh, there's a panic, something bad's going on. We better buy toilet paper. Anyways, don't need to do that. You don't need to stock up on toilet paper because going forward, security is going to be enforced. So if we create a new list, we create a form record, that is going to be protected on the portal. By default, that entity or that table permissions checkbox is going to be checked. If we're creating our own custom web templates, and that is again a topic of a discussion probably for another day, but we can create our own web templates. And if we're going to use Liquid using Fetch XML, that's also protected. If you're doing development within the portal, you're doing JavaScript and you have that portal web API, that is very protected. It does need your table permissions set up. There also is another level permission. You need to define what columns or fields that you're going to be writing back to with the portal web API. You'll need to set that up within the portal. So again, we have that other level of protection there. And then of course, going forward, OData, the map, the calendar controls, all of those things that are part of the list configuration, that will be protected. Now, if you are always following best practices, if you've been doing portals for years and you've been following best practices, you should be covered. You should be okay. You don't need to panic. You don't need to buy toilet paper. Now, here's a couple things that you should do if you're not sure, and that's fine. You probably need to check a few things. First off, you should have received a warning email from Microsoft. Now, I'm probably with the rest of you. I receive hundreds of these things in my mailbox from Office 365 and Microsoft 365. This is happening, this is happening. I ignore a lot of it. However, you would see an email very much like this about your portal saying it could be potentially exposed because you might have lists and forms set up that don't have table permissions enabled. You'll also get warning messages. And so if you remember when I was doing my demo, originally, I'm just going to go back into, once again, I'm just going to go make preview.powerapps.com, just leave that page. You guys are probably like me, you have like 1,000 tabs open by the end of the day. I'm going to go here. And if I go into my apps and go into my portal app to edit it again fresh, right away I'm getting an error message. So it's beginning to message me saying, hey, one of your lists or forms have no set permissions and they must be enabled. So starting in April 2022, Microsoft is going to go in and turn that on for you. Now, the thing to watch out for is if you have a site that maybe is providing data for anonymous users, maybe a listing of upcoming courses or something, you're going to still need to go in and create the table, the entity, the table permissions with the anonymous role. If you don't, Microsoft will turn that on and your visitors are going to see no data. So you're going to need to be on top of this. So that's one way. That's the first warning. The other thing that we can do is going back into Powerapps again. Notice once again, just go here, my hyperlink. I'm going to go into my environment, look at my app here, my portal, and we can go into settings. And I'm going to go into administration. And there's this relatively new tool that's pretty amazing called the Portal Checker. And of course, we have flow checkers, we have Power App checkers. Of course, Portal has to have a checker as well. So we can run this Portal Checker, and it's going to check for a whole variety of things. And I know the team is adding new things to look out for and to check. So we're going to be running this and give this a second to kind of pop up. It's been a few days, so of course it needs to warm up. I'm going to run the Portal Checker. And we see pretty much everything is passed except for this anonymous access to entity forms and entity lists. So it's actually giving me, now the Portal Checker is giving me the GUIDs, which, yeah, that could be helpful. There's ways I can find the records using the GUIDs, but it would be better if I could actually have something a little bit more intelligent. So of course, what I can do is go back to the portal management app here and have my lists. And I'm going to use an old friend that I'm sure all of you are very fond of. I am. Even though it is still using the old user interface, is Advanced Find. Advanced Find is your friend here. I'm just going to go to details. Here's, I'm going to look for my lists. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find where the enable table permissions does not equal yes. Simple search, and I'm going to do this. And here's the contact list that I created probably a while back. So I only have one list. Okay, that's great. So what I can do is I can immediately pop into here and I can scroll down near the bottom and I can make sure I turn on those table permissions. Yeah, I am getting some of those weird things. I'm just going to save and close that. So now no longer I have to worry about my lists. I probably want to do it for my forms as well. I can go through that process and I can identify what needs to be protected. I know I've bombarded you with a ton of information. Just the last thing I want to close off with, what you should be doing as well is here in the, actually in the maker, or sorry, the admin portal. So I'm going to go aka ms.ppac because it's a quick way to get there. And in my resources, I'm going to choose portals. And here's that classroom portal. And here's where we have to actually do a manual upgrade for the managed solutions. A lot of things in the portal are automatically updated. But what you'll need to do is sometimes go into here on a regular basis and make sure that your portals have the latest and greatest solutions. So I'm just seeing here if there's anything there. I think I'm pretty much updated, but that is sort of a kind of housekeeping thing. By implementing these changes, oh yeah, it's telling me that there's portal packages ready. Okay, that's great. And then what I can do is just begin to enable those, and that's going to load those managed solutions. Before you do this though, like here I need to do some updates. Before you actually kick this off, what of course you always should do is back in the administrator where I was, where the portal checker was. Do I still have that up somewhere? I don't. There is a place to put the portal in maintenance mode. Put it in maintenance mode, run the updates, and then take it off. So I probably talked a little bit longer than I hoped, but hopefully I just want to close off my presentation about the Don't Panic. And if you want to learn more, I do have a course on 365.training. Eric did point that out earlier. This course is available for free for another month or two yet. And this goes through a lot of this stuff more in detail. It's a little bit dated, so it's some of the older terms, but it's still valid information. So definitely check that out. It's just an hour and a half, so you can do it in an afternoon and kind of get through and then be pretty much ramped up on the portal security from a more in-depth level. So I talked a lot. I'll turn this over to any kind of questions or further discussion.
Thanks a lot, Nick. That was quite a deep dive. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron.
My question is, can you put a portal up with a custom domain, or do you have to use Microsoft's domain?
Great question. Yeah, no, you can definitely use your own domain. How that's actually done in that admin center that I could actually probably show you pretty quickly. What you would do is, where are we? I have 1,000 things going here. I would go into the administration, and then what you will need to get a SSL certificate. So you need to do that first. Go in, manage SSL certificates, and upload that. Once you've uploaded your SSL, then you go set up custom domains. And you configure this, and then the other thing that you need to do is go into your whether it's GoDaddy or EasyDNS or something, and create a CNAME that's going to Powerapps portals. So nice. Take you just a few minutes. There's a few steps. The steps are there in Microsoft Docs. I'm not sure if I blogged on that particular thing or not, or maybe Heyduke has. There's yeah, the information's there. It's pretty easy.
Cool. Appreciate it.
No problem. Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Nick, I had a question. So, how do we make sure that we only enforce the Azure B2C Azure AD B2C instead of contacts authentication wise?
Oh yeah, the question is about how do we enforce that, because you probably noticed when I signed in my portal, I only had AD and AD B2C. At the end of the day, it's through kind of site settings, but thankfully Microsoft now has a pretty cool wizard that we can manage a lot of this stuff. So what we could do is if I go again here, and now we can, if I go into settings from my portal, I go into authentication. There is an authentication wizard here. And what I ended up doing for here is I disabled the local sign-in, and I only have Azure Active Directory and Azure B2C enabled. I can, of course, configure other authentication providers if I want, and I can even add a custom provider. Now, there's some caveats along with that, and it's kind of a bit of a dark art to do this, but really that's how we can limit particular identity providers for Powerapps portals.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Yeah.
So you can basically add a SAML provider that will not go through Azure B2C?
Yeah, I've never done it, but yeah, that's my understanding. Like something like Okta or something like that, you could use that instead.
Okay.
I know that there's some providers, like I know in Canada, the banks, they have their own kind of providers. Their formats are different, so we're not able to utilize that. But there are some ones that has to provide. There's a certain standard that it needs to follow.
Okay. You were mentioning in April 2022 that Microsoft is going to turn on basically the security for the tables by default.
Yeah.
So that means that basically if I'm working with an organization that already has certain settings and they're not using that, they'll have to do that, or basically everything will stop working.
Correct. Now, in most cases, it would probably be mostly for anonymous access. So I could think of a situation where, let's say I had a listing of data, like, let's say like events that are coming up or something with no security setup at all. And then all of a sudden, April 2022 rolls around, Microsoft flips that switch. They say, hey, we've given you enough warning, we're turning it on. All of a sudden, they're going to go to a blank page. So what's going to happen is you'll need to set up a table permission for that anonymous access and make sure it's linked to the anonymous user's web role.
Okay,
So
and this would be both.
It should have been done at the start anyway, but
yeah,
it's not a ton of work to make it happen.
And this is for tables and pages, basically.
It would be for I don't know for sure. They just gave that message. I'm guessing, but I would believe it's probably just for table permissions, because of course page permissions, that's really more of a configuration thing, whether you want to provide access to pages or not. So I think it'd just be strictly table permissions that they'll flip that switch on.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Any other questions, comments, complaints?
No, let me take over.
Okay, perfect.
Unless there's any other questions. Okay.
You have the floor.
Okay, so questions. This has been taken care of. I guess, Ron, why don't you take over? I think you're on mute.
I was on mute. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Eric, for letting me know. So, yes, excellent presentation, Nick. I learned a tremendous amount. I really appreciate it. So before we drop off, we just have a few housekeeping announcements. Microsoft user groups are still in public preview. and we've started transitioning our user groups there. If and when you get a chance, please register at that website. Our group events are posted there as well in preparation for the platform going live. There are still a few gaps, but we're anticipating that the future functionality will make it a great platform. All right, so Power Platform 2021 Wave 2 release is still available for early access and should start getting pushed worldwide next month. You can enable it today from your sandbox environments in the Power Platform Admin Center. And in addition, there are a few specific announcements we want to talk about. There have been a lot of new functionality. There has been a lot of new functionality added in the last month that's currently in the public preview, including Powerapps formulas, Powerapps calculated columns in Dataverse for teams, and conditional access for individual Powerapps. We now have the ability to change data type formats for text, integer, and date time fields in Dataverse. And they have added JSON and rich text data types. We now have app side panels and in-app notifications. And last but not least, the maintenance window management tool is now added to the Power Platform Admin Center. And with that, I will turn it over to Mahir to bring us home.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is our next event. I guess everybody is interested, and this is one of my favorite topics, which is Data Integration Service, which is going to be using Azure Data Lake and Azure Synapse Link. So if you are using data export service currently with your Dynamics 365 Dataverse data, this would be a very important topic for you. So please do register and do let your friends and colleagues know about this next event. The exact speaker and date is to be finalized, but it will be probably sometime like this in October, 2nd or 3rd week of October. Thank you again, Nick, and I hope everybody enjoyed this session, and I really appreciate your taking your time and attending and making this a very great event for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick.